and the Shroud of Turin is one and the same piece.
For over 600 years, scientists called the Shroud of Turin a medieval fake. The 1988 carbon dating seemed to prove it once and for all. But in 2022, something changed everything. New AI technology looked at the cloth in a way no one had tried before. What it found sent shockwaves through the scientific world. The results didn't just challenge the old tests. They completely flipped the timeline. And now, the same AI that revealed this truth is doing something else. Something that has religious leaders deeply concerned. In 1354, a French knight named Geoffroy de Charny brought a long linen cloth to a small church in Lirey, France. He said it wasn't just another relic, but the very burial shroud that had covered Jesus Christ after his crucifixion. The cloth measured about 4.3 meters long and 1.2 meters wide, and it showed a faint, yellowish image of a man, front and back. People were stunned. Some dropped to their knees. Others doubted it from the start. Because in medieval Europe, relics were everywhere. Fragments of the true cross, bones of saints, and holy objects flooded churches, many of them obvious fakes sold for profit. So when this shroud appeared, with a life-sized body mysteriously imprinted on the fabric, the debate began immediately.
The thighs, and this would throw the whole weight of the body onto the wrists.
By 1389, that debate exploded. The Bishop of Troyes, Pierre d'Arcy, had had enough. He wrote a formal complaint to Pope Clement VII, saying the shroud was a fake, and that an artist had even confessed to painting it. He accused the churchmen at Lirey of showing it to pilgrims just to make money, all while privately knowing it was a fraud. The Pope didn't call it genuine, but he didn't ban it either. He allowed it to be shown as an icon, not a relic, something to inspire faith, not to prove history. But even that couldn't stop the fascination. In 1453, the powerful House of Savoy bought the shroud and moved it to their chapel in Chambéry. Then came disaster. On a freezing night in 1532, a fire broke out in the chapel. Molten silver from the reliquary dripped onto the folded cloth, burning through several layers. The cloth survived, but it was badly scarred. The symmetrical burn marks and water stains are still visible today. In 1578, the Savoys moved it again, this time to Turin, Italy, where it stayed for hundreds of years. In 1983, Umberto II, the last king of Italy and final owner of the shroud, gave it to the Vatican in his will. But even he never claimed it was real. He passed it on without forcing the Catholic Church to officially declare it genuine. And so the Church kept it in what some call holy suspense, neither confirming nor denying, allowing it to remain a symbol of Christ's suffering while never declaring it authentic. Some moments in the shroud's journey are almost too strange to believe. In 1418, during the chaos of the 100 Years' War, Geoffroy de Charny's granddaughter, Marguerite, took the shroud and refused to give it back. She toured with it, showing it for money, and eventually sold it to the Savoys in exchange for 2 castles. She was excommunicated for it. Even more unsettling is a theory from the 1300s that claimed a real crucified body may have been used to create the image. One rumor even said it was Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, who was tortured in 1307 in a way that mirrored the wounds of Christ. Some believe his body might have been wrapped in cloth, scorched and broken, to leave behind the eerie figure we still see today. Whether that story is true or not, it shows how far people might have gone, either in devotion or deceit, to create something that touched the divine. Centuries later, the mystery deepened. In 1898, an Italian photographer named Secondo Pia took the first official photos of the shroud. What he saw on the negatives made his hands shake. The faint image on the cloth suddenly became clear, showing the face and body of a man in haunting detail. It looked three-dimensional, almost like a sculpture lit from within. This changed everything. Scientists began to analyze the image using modern tools. In the 1970s, computers revealed that the darkness of each part of the image matched the distance between the cloth and a hypothetical body, meaning the cloth somehow captured depth information. This wasn't just a drawing, it encoded shape. Then came the wounds. Researchers counted more than 100 markings that looked exactly like scourge wounds. Dumbbell-shaped lesions consistent with Roman whips that had metal balls on the tips. They appeared on the back, chest, and legs, just like the gospel accounts of Jesus being flogged. Under ultraviolet light, these marks even glowed with the same halo pattern that dried serum leaves behind, the same way real blood does when it clots and leaks. The man's face looked battered, with a swollen cheek and what seemed like a broken nose. These features were invisible to the naked eye in normal light, but the camera and computers saw what no painter from the 1300s ever could. Even skeptics admitted it was a masterpiece, if it was fake. One historian famously said, "If this is a forgery, it's a bloody brilliant one."
Photographic image, in my opinion, untouched by hand, not made by man.
Because it didn't just look like a man. It looked like a man who had suffered in ways that matched the crucifixion story in painful, precise detail. And it preserved those signs in a medium so strange that even with all the science we've thrown at it, the shroud refuses to give up its secret. For centuries, the shroud remained silent, hidden behind glass and legend. But everything changed in 1978. That year, a team of scientists from across the world flew to Turin. Chemists, physicists, forensic experts. They called themselves the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP. For 5 full days, they ran every test they could think of without damaging the linen. They X-rayed it, scanned it with ultraviolet light, pulled fiber samples, and examined it under microscopes. Their findings shocked even the skeptics. In 1981, they finally released their report. They declared that the image on the cloth was not painted, not drawn, not dyed. No pigments, no brush strokes, no binding agents like you'd find in paint. What they found instead was something much stranger. The fibers themselves were scorched in a pattern that looked like a man. But they couldn't explain how. They proposed theories. Maybe it was a chemical reaction, maybe some kind of radiation burst. But none of them could fully explain how a three-dimensional image ended up burned into ancient linen with such detail. It was real blood, too. Bloodstains lined up with wounds on the body. Wrists, side, feet, forehead. It wasn't just random splatters. It made sense anatomically. Everything matched the story of a crucifixion. One of the scientists even said it plainly. The shroud is a mystery. But then came 1988. A small piece of the shroud was cut away and sent to 3 different laboratories: Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona. They were going to carbon date it, the test everyone had waited for. If the shroud was real, the cloth would date back to around the time of Christ. If it didn't, then centuries of belief would fall apart. The labs finished their work. In 1989, the results were published in the journal Nature. They said the cloth was made between 1260 and 1390 AD. That's medieval, not ancient, not from Jerusalem. And just like that, most scientists declared the case closed. Newspapers around the world shouted that the shroud was a hoax. A brilliant one, maybe, but still a fake. And yet, not everyone accepted that conclusion. There were problems. Statisticians noticed that the 3 labs had come up with strangely different dates. That shouldn't happen. When the raw data was finally released, it showed something odd. One end of the tested strip gave an older date than the other end. That shouldn't happen either. If the cloth was from the same time period, every tiny piece should test the same. This hinted that the sample might have been a mixture of old and new threads. It turns out the area they cut the sample from wasn't just any part of the shroud. It was from a corner that had been damaged in a fire in 1532. That spot had been repaired. Experts suspected that nuns had rewoven that corner with newer thread centuries after the shroud was first made. Two researchers, Joe Marino and Sue Benford, argued that Renaissance weavers could invisibly reweave old linen with newer cotton and then dye it to match. That would explain why the carbon dating came out younger than expected. Then in 2005, Ray Rogers, who had been part of the original STURP team and had dismissed the reweave theory at first, got new thread samples from the same corner. Under the microscope, he saw exactly what Marino and Benford had claimed. Cotton threads coated in dye. Newer material interwoven with old linen. And crucially, it was completely different from the rest of the cloth. If the labs had tested that repaired patch, the date they found wouldn't tell us anything about the actual age of the shroud. Rogers came to a shocking conclusion. The carbon dating was invalid. They hadn't dated the shroud, they had dated a medieval repair. Still, many in the scientific world were skeptical, but the questions didn't stop. In 2017, a legal request forced researchers in the UK to release all the raw carbon dating data. By 2019, a new statistical analysis confirmed the earlier suspicions. The data was inconsistent. It wasn't reliable. And that meant the door to the mystery was open again. Other clues had already started piling up. In the 1970s, a Swiss criminologist named Max Frey had pressed sticky tape across the shroud and collected tiny particles. After he died, botanists continued his work. By the late 1990s, they had identified 58 different types of pollen. Not just from France or Italy, many were from the Middle East, plants found only in Jerusalem, the Dead Sea, and Sinai. One of them, Zygophyllum domosum, only grows in Israel, Jordan, and parts of Egypt. Its pollen, and even faint traces of its flower, was found on the shroud. Of course, critics argued that pollen can travel, can stick to clothes or containers, but the pattern was too specific. It wasn't just one or two foreign grains, it was a wide variety, all pointing to the same region, ancient Judea. And there were more strange findings. In 1995, a doctor named Alan Wanger used image enhancement software to study the shroud. He claimed to see faint outlines of flowers, even coin patterns near the eyes. He said the markings resembled Roman coins from the time of Pontius Pilate. Not everyone believed this. Some thought it was imagination or artifact, but the idea stuck. The shroud might carry traces of its long journey. Then came 2002. The shroud was professionally restored. Damaged edges were trimmed, old patches removed, the backing cloth replaced. This gave scientists access to new parts of the linen. They noticed something striking. The blood stains on the cloth didn't just look random. They followed the laws of gravity, anatomy, and trauma. Blood had trickled from the wrists down the arms. It had pooled at the lower back. There were puncture marks in the wrists and feet, exactly where nails would have gone. And even more intriguing, the thumbs were not visible. In Roman crucifixions, nails driven through the wrists can damage the median nerve, making the thumbs contract. That's what the shroud shows, and that's something no medieval artist would likely have known. In 2005, an Italian medical examiner, Dr. Pierluigi Bologna, published a full study. He concluded the wounds were consistent with a man who had been crucified, his arms outstretched, his body strained, blood flowing just as it would from such a death. The image didn't match the popular art of Jesus from the Middle Ages. It matched what modern medicine and archaeology know about Roman execution. In 2022, something unexpected happened that shook everything we thought we knew about the Shroud of Turin. a group of Italian scientists, led by Dr. Liberato De Caro, decided to ignore old methods and try something completely different. Instead of using carbon dating like the 1988 test, they used a method that didn't even exist back then. It was called wide-angle X-ray scattering. It didn't look at radioactive decay. It looked at the structure of the fibers themselves, how the X-rays bounced off the inner layers of the linen, how time had reshaped the material deep inside. And that changed everything. These researchers weren't just guessing. They built a curve, a timeline, based on ancient fabrics whose ages were already known. They used real samples from real centuries, including cloth from Roman times like the Siege of Maceda in AD 73. Then they took 8 microscopic samples from the shroud, barely visible to the naked eye. What they saw left them stunned. The patterns matched the ones found in linen from the 1st century, not the 1200s, not the 1300s, but somewhere around 55 to 74 AD. That alone was enough to get people's attention, because that wasn't just old, that was the time of Jesus. The range overlapped with the very decades many believed the crucifixion happened. Suddenly, the idea that the shroud was a medieval fake didn't feel so certain anymore. And there was something else. These samples weren't taken from the same corner used in 1988. That part of the cloth had always been controversial. Some believed it had been repaired in the Middle Ages, which would have thrown off the results. But this time, the threads were from cleaner areas. No dye, no cotton, just original linen. That meant the readings were more likely to reflect the actual age of the fabric itself, not some patched-up section from centuries later. Still, there were questions. Wax isn't as widely known as carbon dating. It relies on measuring how the fibers age in normal conditions. The team assumed the cloth had spent most of its life in places that weren't too hot or too humid, mostly churches and reliquaries in Europe, often in cool, dry spaces. It had even survived fires and smoke, and since 1998, it's been sealed in a climate-controlled case filled with argon gas at around 19 or 20 degrees Celsius. That mattered, because if the cloth had been stored somewhere warmer or wetter, it might have aged faster. But the researchers argued their assumptions were realistic. They had looked at the shroud's actual storage history. They had taken that into account. Dr. De Caro said the results were fully compatible with the idea that the shroud was 2,000 years old. He even said the carbon dating from 1988 was probably wrong, and the sample they used wasn't representative. In interviews, he didn't hold back. He called for a new round of radiocarbon testing, this time using multiple samples from different parts of the cloth. Not just one corner. He wanted to see if the results would line up with the WAX-S data. If they did, it would be strong evidence. If not, then the debate would continue. People reacted in different ways. Some saw it as proof. Others were more cautious. WAX-S was still new. The team only tested a few threads, and some scientists warned that things like bacteria or past damage might skew the results. Others pointed out that all dating methods carry some level of uncertainty. Even carbon dating has a margin of error. But the researchers were confident. They had tested known samples. They had used linen from verified historical events. The shroud's readings didn't just fall in the ancient range. They stood apart from medieval cloth. The older fabrics had higher crystallinity, more breakdown, more time had passed. That's what the shroud showed too. When the study was published in the journal Heritage in 2022, it didn't explode immediately. But by 2023 and 2024, people began to notice. It circulated in science news, Christian websites, historical journals. Some saw it as a turning point. Others called it just another theory. But the facts were there. The tests were real. The results were recorded. And for the first time in decades, the debate had shifted. While scientists were still trying to figure out how the image on the Shroud of Turin was even created in the first place, another group took a very different approach. Instead of solving the mystery, they tried to reimagine it using modern tools. In 2023 and 2024, artificial intelligence tools like Midjourney, DALL-E, and Stable Diffusion became incredibly powerful. So Shroud researchers and curious artists had an idea. What if they could ask AI to show the real face behind the shroud? What would Jesus look like if you turned that faded image into a lifelike human being? In April 2024, the Daily Express in the UK tried exactly that. They used Midjourney to generate a human face based on high-resolution images of the shroud. They might have added some descriptions too, like the crown of thorns, the bruises, the hair. The result was strange and haunting. It looked like a man in his 30s with long, wavy hair down to his shoulders, a full beard, and a pair of tired, sad eyes. The face wasn't just randomly generated. You could actually see what looked like small cuts on the cheek, swelling around the nose, and even the faint puncture wounds across the forehead. These were details copied directly from the shroud. The lash marks, the blood trails, the signs of suffering. To many people, it felt like the shroud had finally been turned into a real person. The newspaper called this image the true face of Jesus. They weren't subtle about it. With new studies claiming the cloth really dated back to Jesus' time, this AI creation suddenly felt more than just a guess. And soon, others jumped in. The Sun, another British paper, used GenCraft AI to make its own version. Their Jesus had hazel eyes and a gentle, worn-out look, like someone who had been through a lifetime of pain. There were clear bags under the eyes, a soft expression. The article even called it the face of an exhausted savior. Some versions of the image also showed clothes, though many people argued that this was a mistake. The man in the shroud had been buried naked. Adding robes or tunics, they said, turned it into fantasy. Then things went even further. On YouTube and TikTok, creators began animating the face. They took the still image and brought it to life, adding blinking eyes, small movements, and soft head turns. In one viral clip, the face actually spoke. It recited the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic. That particular video came from a Spanish channel, and after it was shared by the newspaper Marca, it racked up millions of views in just a few days. People couldn't look away. Some called it beautiful. Others said it felt wrong. Some even used the word blasphemous, because even though it was just an AI animation, it looked like Jesus was alive again and talking. All over social media, these images spread with captions like, "This is what Jesus really looked like," and "AI brings the shroud to life." The Hindustan Times called the images one of the most compelling glimpses of Jesus' possible face, because they were based directly on what many believe to be his actual burial cloth. But how does any of this work? How does AI take a dusty image and turn it into a human face? The shroud gives a clear, front-facing image of a man. It's flat and faint, but it has outlines. You can see the size of the face, the shape of the beard, even the nose. That's enough for AI to begin filling in the blanks. These image generators have been trained on billions of photos, many of them religious art or old paintings of Jesus. When you feed the shroud into the system, the AI blends those patterns with what it knows about faces. It guesses what healthy skin would look like. It adds light. It builds depth. The result isn't random. It's a mix of logic, data, and imagination. One more twist. The team at the Daily Express said they didn't just use a flat image. They added 3D data from the shroud. That's because the cloth actually contains faint clues about distance. If you scan it the right way, you can measure the raised parts of the face, like the nose and cheekbones. The AI used that too. That's how the animation ended up with a swollen cheek on one side and a crooked nose, both of which matched the bruises and injuries on the real shroud. These tiny touches made the image feel more real. To people who've studied the Shroud for years, it didn't feel like a random guess. It felt eerily accurate. The AI became like a digital artist, cleaning up the blurred parts, sharpening the lines, and filling in the gaps with color. It took the sepia tones of the cloth and replaced them with warm, olive-colored skin. The blood stains turned bright red. The hair became a soft brown. And in some versions, the wounds on the body even followed the logic of gravity. Blood trickled downward in the direction it would have flowed if a man were hanging on a cross. These weren't just pretty pictures. They were studied, edited, processed, and designed to match the Shroud detail for detail. Some people were excited to see what AI could do with ancient relics, but not everyone was thrilled. In fact, for many Christians, the moment those AI-generated Jesus faces started spreading, it felt like a red line had been crossed. Not just because the image was wrong or strange, but because it touched something sacred. The Shroud of Turin, if you believe in it, isn't just cloth. It's a miracle. People have called it not made by human hands for centuries. It's mysterious on purpose. Its power lies in what it doesn't explain. But now, AI comes in with its confident guesses and spits out a full-color portrait. Suddenly, the sacred becomes ordinary. The mystery becomes pixels, and that's where the fear starts. Back in 2015, Pope Francis warned that we were beginning to treat technology like a false god, not as a tool, but as something we worship. Now we have AI turning holy relics into animations, voiceovers, even talking avatars. It's not just about disrespect, it's about confusion. When a computer model creates an image of Jesus and people start praying to it, or worse, treating it like Jesus himself, something shifts. That's not art anymore. That's imitation disguised as presence. One of the most famous voices in the modern church, Bishop Robert Barron, has tried to explain the line. He says, yes, technology can help you learn about God. It can bring people together, but it should never replace your relationship with God. Because a relationship means effort. It means reverence. And none of that exists inside a neural network. No prayer shaped that AI face. No love trained that model. It was built with data, not devotion. Then things got more bizarre. People didn't just want an image of Jesus. They wanted to talk to him. So developers built chatbots. There's an app called Text with Jesus. You open it, you type a message, and an AI pretending to be Jesus answers. It quotes scripture. It comforts you. It even forgives your sins. And that's when the alarms truly rang. One tester typed in a confession. The AI Jesus replied, "Your sins are forgiven, my child, but only God can forgive sins." And in many Christian traditions, forgiveness must be given through a sacrament by a priest. So if a chatbot says, "You're forgiven," people might believe it. But they'd be wrong. They wouldn't just be misled. They'd be spiritually misled.